My name is my full name is Olu Robbin-Coker. Some of you can relate to these kind of long names. As Clement mentioned, I'm a psychologist. There's only one thing that I think Clement didn't mention strong enough in my introduction. He says he's known me. Clement is my friend. He's my good friend. And he's been very, very supportive, very helpful to me at different stages in my life. And it's just wonderful we ended up in Denmark together, where he can still be there to help me out. But I look forward to talking about this topic, and it's a topic that I'm very passionate about. If I would just give a short background, in fact, maybe I'll do that as part of my introduction. In Denmark, I'm known as an erhvervspsykolog, or you can call it an organizational psychologist in English. But I've not always been an organizational psychologist. I've gone through different phases in my career, in different seasons. I'm originally from Sierra Leone in West Africa, and moved to the UK when I was around 15, 16. I'm 47 now. So I've actually lived longer outside my home country than I have in my own home country, which is a very strange thing when I think about it sometimes. But my journey has been a bit of an eye-opener on many ways, because I think this whole topic of health and spirituality, in many ways it started for me at one point when I read a book called How People Grow by Cloud and Townsend. And I used to be part of Youth with a Mission organization, and was one of the leaders in Scotland. Oh, I always set a timer when I talk that vibrates, so I stop on time. I need to set that. And it opened my eyes, because one of the fundamental premises of the book was all growth is spiritual growth. Now, I know some of you will already have difficulty with that statement. And this is where sometimes, someone once told me, he said, never apologize when you do a talk. So I'm not going to apologize, but I'm going to give a warning and say, sometimes I'm going to inspire you, sometimes I'm going to challenge you, and there's a risk that occasionally I might even offend you with some of the stuff I say. But I'm not going to apologize. But I will behave myself appropriately. But this thing about healthy spirituality, in many ways for me, it's about a more balanced approach, a more balanced view of both humanity, Christianity, one another, of areas such as healing, which I want to touch on, areas such as wisdom and growth and how we make progress in life. Because unfortunately, we can get lost along the way. So when this book, I read this book over 20 years ago, and I'm reading it again at the moment because I knew that it was a major milestone in my Christian life. Understanding this principle about all growth is spiritual growth. Because we are a whole being. Depending on what definitions you look at, what way you want to look at it, I always feel a little bit more comfortable when I take my jacket off. You've seen me looking good now? Yeah, we happy? Okay, I can be informal now. Thank you. So we are spirit, soul, and body. And one of the general principles, I sometimes use very strong militant language. I always say, use the right weapons for the right battle. But I thought I'll tone it down a little bit and say, we've just got to remember to use the right tools in the right situation. So we got to remember that holistic perspective. Now, some of you will think, oh, Olu's biased, he's a psychologist, therefore he only thinks about the psychological perspective. But let me give you a bit of background. Like Clement mentioned, I've not always been a psychologist. I've been a youth pastor in a charismatic church. I've been a missionary and a missionary trainer in a missionary organization before I became a psychologist. But these three jobs that I've had, these three main jobs that I have, they have one thing in common. And that's what everybody in here, we all have at least one thing in common. We're in the growing people business. Whether you are a pastor discipling people, because that's what we call it in a Christian context. We call it discipleship. Whether you're a trainer training people as to be missionaries, or whether you're a psychologist working with people, coaching people, guiding people, we're helping people grow. And that's why I said, like I started with this book as part of my introduction. We are in the business of growing people. That's what we do. And that's why it's important to know that we need a holistic perspective to growing people. Now, I'm going to say some things occasionally based on my experience, and some of them will sound extreme. But that's the experiences I've had. Those are some of the people I know. Those are some of the situations I've been involved in. And I know that it won't apply to all of you, but some of you will relate to it. And sometimes we learn both through the good examples, but we learn also by when things go wrong. So I think it's really important to have this understanding that we are a whole being. We have a spiritual side to us. We have our physical body, and we have our soul. You know, some people use the fancy word, the tripartite approach to understanding humans. And we have emotions, there's a mental side to us. There's all these different aspects. We have a brain that we can't leave out the door just because we're going to church. So we need to have this holistic perspective about spirituality. So one of the Bible verses that has always spoken very deeply to me is in Isaiah 53. Because I think it gives us this holistic perspective. Some of you are in doubt whether this psychologist was actually going to quote the Bible. Huh? Okay, now we got it. Foundation for me is always going to be the Bible. But Isaiah 53, one of the ways I began to understand it, probably 15, 20 years ago, was seeing that the salvation and healing that we receive, that is prophesied about in Isaiah 53, actually touches on different aspects. So I know this might be, for you biblical scholars, you think I'm oversimplifying a little bit, and yeah, I admit I am. But I think we can see that when we look at this Bible, it says, surely he has borne our griefs and sorrows. For me, that points to the emotional side of who we are. So Jesus died on the cross for our emotional healing and restoration. Yeah? He carried our griefs, he carried our sorrows. There's no one here who can say they've never experienced grief or sorrow. We all have. And he says, we did not esteem, sorry if I'm using an old King James. I know sometimes use King James or NIV and NASB. I use different versions, yeah? But he said, we go on and said, we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But then he goes on and says, but he was wounded for our transgressions. So that's one of these classic Bible verses many of us know. And that's what we talk about. Yeah, that in a sense is about our spiritual salvation. That is our traditional gospel of Jesus died for our sins, to save us, to bring salvation to us, to bring eternal life to us. Yeah? Then there's another one saying, the chastisement of our peace. So again, this idea of peace, especially in the Old Testament, this idea of peace was actually a very holistic word, because it comes from the word shalom that we often talk about. But it's about wholeness. It's about when life is fulfilled and complete. So again, for me, as a psychologist, I know I have a bias. I think it points to mental health as well as other things. That we have peace in our lives. Things are whole, yeah? And then also it talks about by his stripes we are healed. So again, I think that could point to the physical aspect. So this is my way of saying Jesus died for the whole person. Not just for spiritual salvation, where, when you die you go to heaven, but in the meantime, tough luck, about your sorrows and your griefs and your emotional pain. He died for the whole person. Body, soul, spirit. Physical, emotional, and spiritual. And when we have this perspective, I think it helps us address some issues. Now, there's a lot of different issues I could go into, but I'm going to go into 3 and 1 extra real quick to just highlight a few challenges that we're facing and how I believe we could do better. Let's talk, for example, about something like healing. If, like me, you're in the growth business, helping people grow, then one of the things that you experience is people have problems and they need healing. They need help to come through difficult situations in their lives. One of the challenges I face, though, sometimes is when poor Christians are told Go and pray and read your Bible, and that will be enough. And if that doesn't work, it's because you're not doing right. Or we pray for someone for physical healing, and they don't get healed. They say it's your lack of faith that's the problem. How does that help that person? I 100% believe in supernatural healing. I myself have experienced some amount of healing from God in my physical body, but there's also areas where I haven't received the healing that I've prayed for. But one of the things that I think we need to be realistic about is that, and this is going to sound like heresy, prayer alone is not always enough. Prayer alone is not always the right tool or the right weapon in that battle. And sometimes when I talk to all people say, oh, you're a psychologist. Even my own mom, sometimes when I get into debates with her about spiritual things, she has a couple of ways she can always put me down and shut down the conversation. Some of you might even be thinking it right now. Say, oh, no, but you don't know the things I've seen. I'm living in Africa where there's witch doctors and all this kind of stuff going on. You've become too Europeanized. Yeah, that's what my mom said to me. Or, you're not at the level I am now. My mom's 82. Yeah, I'm not at the level she is. You know, if you've been through the spiritual maturity, you would understand. And I'm like, I understand, Mom, but I'm trying to say to you, sometimes people's problems are not necessarily spiritual, they're psychological, that need counseling. There's trauma that needs to be dealt with. And if we associate everything that it's spiritual and it's supernatural and it's witches, etc., then we have a problem. And sometimes we can end up stigmatizing very innocent people and making their lives even worse. I have a bit of a harsh example I want to give you very quickly. I was involved some years ago in a situation where a poor girl who was just having a tough time in life because she came from a war zone, was left by her parents in a refugee camp. She was having a tough time in life. And then, because of some of the problems and because she was getting into some amount of trouble, and you know what? I don't know about your kids. I've got teenagers. Kids get into trouble. Some more than others. But some people decided that the problem was spiritual and this girl was into some form of witchcraft. And that made her a stigma in the society she was in, the group where she was. And there was even attempts at poisoning this girl. And even when this girl ended up in Denmark, her own family treated her like there was something wrong with her. And the bottom line is, this girl was traumatized and needed help. And even today, sadly, that girl is not getting the help she needed. Because in the end, things got so bad with the way she was being treated by her own family and by her church, insisting that this girl is a witch. She ended up having to get help through the commune and come to another family, and she's still struggling where she is. Instead of giving a girl compassion and love and care and helping her deal with trauma, she was stigmatized and called a witch. That's just not good enough. God does not entrust children into our care to be treated like this. So I think part of the challenge sometimes, if the only way we're thinking is that, it must only be a spiritual problem, therefore the answer must be spiritual, then of course we're going to end up in abusive situations like this. But if we can meet people where they are and use our God-given discernment to say, what is the problem here? Is it a spiritual problem that needs spiritual healing? Is it an issue of trauma that needs counseling? Is it some biochemical dysfunction that's causing a mood disorder that needs medicine? We need discernment. So it's not enough to just say, we'll just pray. Just read your Bible. It's not always the answer. For general growth, for generally living our lives as wisely as possible, yes, prayer and Bible. But sometimes there are some problems that need other tools in play. Otherwise, we end up in situations that can be actually abusive. And I know that's an extreme example, but I have other examples that are not quite as extreme, but still inappropriate. I know of a woman, she's very mad at me and unfriended me on Facebook, but she came to Denmark, prayed for a bunch of people, laid hands on them, declared them healed, and I had to go pick up the pieces later, because some of these people, they weren't healed. In fact, the majority of people I could get in touch with to follow up, they weren't healed. And some of them, their problems were medical. There was a lady one time with diabetes who she declared healed. She ended up in hospital because she didn't take her medicine. Because she told her, if you take your medicine, that lack of faith. You're healed, I've declared you healed, don't take your medicine anymore. She ended up in hospital. I know a guy who is schizophrenic, and again, someone prayed for him, declared him healed, he stopped taking his medicine, he ended up in the psychiatric ward because he couldn't even recognize his own children. That's how psychotic he was. We're not doing anybody favors when we do this. So if it's spiritual problems, we deal with them spiritually, but we need to be open to the fact that sometimes it's trauma and counseling, trauma that needs counseling, or it's biochemical things happening in people's brains that need medicine. Otherwise, we get ourselves into trouble. Another aspect that I'm learning a lot about is the use of wisdom and logic. And I love when the Danes say, "Sun fornuft." You know? Just logical reasoning. One of the things that breaks my heart is when I feel like sometimes you can get a very smart, clever person, maybe a businessman, maybe an academic, maybe a pastor, whatever, a reasonably sharp person in their day-to-day lives, in their jobs, but put them in a church context, and it's as if they left their brain out the door. They stop critical thinking. They stop reflection. They stop thinking wisely. What do I mean by this? I was at a meeting one time, and this young man wanted prayer. Let me explain to you what he wanted prayer about. He wanted prayer because he'd spent too much money, and the bank was now after him, and he needed prayer to deal with these people who were against him, who were persecuting him, to get their money back. And he received the prayer he wanted. But I stood there and I thought, hold on a sec. This is basic mathematics. If you spend more money than you have, and you borrow from the bank, you're going to run out of money, and the bank is going to want their money back. This is not a prayer issue. This is not a spiritual issue. This is just wisdom. This is financial wisdom. This is knowing some of the basics. And I won't lie to you, it breaks my heart. I live in a part of Holstebro where sometimes it genuinely breaks my heart to see how some of my brothers and sisters, Africans, other ethnic minorities, how they're living their lives. Because they're not, and many of them Christians, and they're saying, oh, God's not providing, or God's not. But when they get money, the things they use their money on, I just don't get it. Well, let me admit, I do get it, because I was there 25 years ago. That I lived from day to day, and I say the Lord will provide, and I didn't have any savings, and when I had money, I used it quickly. But of course, then you're going to end up in debt. Of course, you're going to end up in challenges. Fortunately for me, there were some wise people in my life that started to guide me a little bit, like my big brother and sister, and even my wife. I remember when my wife first said to me, Olu, let's start some savings for the children. I thought to myself, what's wrong with you? We're poor missionaries. We can barely get by, and you want to start savings for the children that they're going to use when they're 18? What about right now? See, that is the poor African mentality. Forgive me for saying it that way. And it's understandable, because sometimes people are living day to day. In my country, one of the poorest countries in the world, I forgot to say I'm from Sierra Leone in West Africa. It's still ranked as one of the poorest countries in the world. People do live from day to day. So that even when there's plenty, they don't always know how to manage it. And it's a process of learning how to manage. But I started to learn. So I remember my wife said this, and I'm so grateful she did now, because at that time, seriously, we were poor missionaries being supported by charitable gifts and sponsors, and there was not a lot of money. But every month, we put 100 kroner, the equivalent, £10 back then, to the side for our kids, which then later, and then the government did this program where if you started a savings for your children, they would start it off for you with an extra shot in. But it just meant that when my oldest turned 18, there was a lump sum she could take that helped her to get her driving license. A lot of the time, I don't worry about money. And it's not because I have a good job and I make lots of money. No, it's because my wife has taught me how to budget, and everything goes into a budget account and a savings account. So when my glasses breaks and I need a new one, it's already there. When the car breaks down, I don't have to panic, And it means sometimes I don't get to eat the fancy meals I want to eat or go on the holidays I want to go, but it means we're living within a budget. So it breaks my heart sometimes when people blame God for their financial difficulties when maybe it's poor stewardship. But because I do believe all growth is spiritual growth, as we learn financial wisdom, we're also growing spiritual. Because the Bible does call us to be good stewards. It says we should be innocent as doves, but we should be wise as serpents, but innocent as doves, or harmless as doves. We should be innocent, but we need to be sharp. We need to be wise about it. The other area that I do think sometimes, again, I get very concerned is health. Is that I get very worried about my Christian brothers and sisters, especially in America. They're really bad. But generally speaking, we don't always take care of our health. Again, we think, God will look after me. I remember being a missionary when people would say, I'd rather burn out for the Lord. I'm going to burn so bright for Jesus until I burn out. Trust me, you don't want to burn out. I sit with people week after week who've experienced stress and burnout. It's no joke. The percentage of burnout amongst pastors and Christian ministers, it's too high. It's too high. And do you know why? Because we think, God will look after me. I'm his special servant. We think we can defy the laws of biology. You can't defy the laws of biology just because you're serving God. We need to use sun vernunft, smartness, our wiseness to know that we need to take care of ourselves. That is the greatest gift you can give to your congregation, the people you lead, your family, is to take care of yourself so you live as long as possible. But people think, I'll burn myself out, I won't take care of myself, I won't exercise, I won't eat healthy, I'll just do what I want, but God will look after me. That's not wisdom. And I love you too much not to challenge you on this. We cannot defy. God himself has set the laws of nature in place. Has he not? If I decide to jump off this platform head first, what's going to happen? Even when Jesus was tempted to say, okay, jump off this, the angels will catch you. Jesus wasn't stupid, was he? Unless he received a direct message from God that says, I'll jump off this, I'll catch you, then he's not going to do it. So we need to walk wisely, whether it be finances, whether it be relationships, whether it be our physical bodies, taking care of ourselves. That's the best gift you can give to yourself, to your loved ones, to your church, is that you live a long, healthy. More and more scientists, they don't talk about lifespan anymore. They talk about health span. The reason why they begin to use, because yes, modern technology and medicine and science is helping us to live longer. But the quality of life, and this is like what I'm saying to you, it's particularly bad in the US, but the quality of life for the last 10 years of a lot of people's life is very poor. They're in and out of the hospital. They're just being kept alive. But by being smart and doing our best. Nobody's perfect in this. I'm not perfect in this. Give me a gigantic hotel, okay, I'll eat it, man. You know, it's hard to resist. Even though I have lactose intolerance, I take some pills sometimes and I eat that hotel or okay. Nobody's going to be perfect in this, you know. None of us. But we need to have it in our mind. We can't just think, oh, God will look after me. Do you know how many people, how many pastors? I know some of you here sitting here, you know people who have burnt out in the ministry. Or maybe you yourself have burnt out or been close to burnout because you didn't take care of yourself, neither physically nor mentally. You thought, oh, I'm sacrificing myself for God. I'm sacrificing myself for God's people. Jesus did most of the sacrifice, if not all of the sacrifice that is required. We are just servants there now, available to implement it and help people grow more and more into it. So I think we need to have wisdom in all matters. We can't have this unhealthy spirituality, is what I think it is, where we just say, oh, I'll just live my life how I want. God will take care of it. God is not, he doesn't feel committed to having to rescue you from disastrous situations that you place yourself in. Because he loves you, he will. But it's not because, it's not his heart's desire for you anyway. In his kindness, many times, he rescues us from these situations. So if you've been able to live your life without thinking properly financially, without taking good care of your physical health, etc., and you're still doing great, then it's by grace. It's not normal. Consider yourself very special, you know, because God put natural law for a reason. So we can't defy the laws of biology and think we'll be okay. The other thing I wanted to talk about was, again, in a holistic context, in a healthy spirituality, we need to have integrity and character. There's many ways we can be, in our love and in our zeal to serve God, in our love for God and our zeal and our passion for God, we can forget that we need to be good examples. So having integrity and character as leaders is very, very important. There was a period in my Bible study group. Again, every now and then I might say a little bit too much right on the edge. But I'm this Bible study group I've been for years. At one point, there's a Kenyan lady who's married to a Norwegian, and I'm married to a Dane. At one point, the Norwegian guy, he banned us from talking about bad African pastors. Because it felt like every month or so, there would be something in the news about some African pastor. And it was, sadly, a lot of times African pastors who were abusing their power. They were getting people to eat grass, you know. They were getting people to do weird stuff. There was one that got them to drink chlorine, and this is what I mean about sometimes you got clever people forgetting their training and their cleverness. There were even nurses who drank this chlorine and got sick because this guy said drink chlorine or some chemical. And this is just spiritual abuse. There's no other way around it. I know that many of us come from cultures, and this is where Denmark is a strong contrast, and I've had to learn a lot of stuff. But some of us come from cultures that are very hierarchical. You know, whether it's in the family where dad decides everything, or it's in the job and the boss decides everything, or it's in church. Pastors, the authority decides everything. Many of us come from these kind of hierarchical cultures, so we don't always question. So when pastor says do this or do that, we do it. And this is what happens with some of these people. And in many ways, I don't blame those people. Because when God has entrusted people into the care of leaders, then the leader has the responsibility. That's why the Bible says shepherds will be judged more harshly. Teachers will be judged more harshly. They will be, because they have a responsibility. So it's important we use the power and influence we have on people ethically. I saw in my news feed something sneak up there recently. It was anonymized very much, but it said, yep, that pastor who was in Vibu area, who had abused the trust of some of the women in his church, he's finally been fined and judged, etc. And I'm like, it's heartbreaking. What kind of signal does that send out to the world? It breaks my heart. It breaks my heart. So we have power and authority when we're in positions of influence. In fact, they passed a law because of some of the stuff that has happened in Denmark that means that pastors will be judged as harshly as psychologists if they misuse the power, the influence and authority they have in the context of a client or a member of the congregation. If they misuse, they will be judged very harshly. That's why I say we're all in the same business. We help people grow. So we will be judged more harshly, both by God, but by the authorities if we misuse that power. So it's really important we walk in integrity. Let me share a personal story why this means so much to me. I used to be in Youth with a Mission. And I was progressing very well in the organization, learning a lot of things from a lot of good people, being mentored. But I remember at one point, one of the leaders, he was very much interested in giving me even more responsibility. But it never happened. And I learned later why it didn't happen. Because I was in a leaders' meeting at one point where one of our very senior leaders, he actually admitted something that it shocked me. It shocked me, but it woke me up at the same time. He says, we're often scared to promote ethnic minority leaders because it often ends in scandal. I was like, what? At first I thought that is a racist comment. I'll be honest with you. But when I started to look at the stats and the examples we had, I thought, it's true. It's true. Unfortunately, so many times there are scandals happening, and unfortunately, it often was an ethnic minority leader that had been involved in that scandal for some reason or the other. And I don't claim to know the answers. I don't. But it challenged me. And it made me realize, wow, I probably have no future here. If that's the perception that they have, that in a way I almost feel like they wanted to protect me. Because they said, maybe if we give you too much power and influence while you're still, because that was like 15 years ago, almost 20 years ago. I was still a relatively young person. So maybe they were right. Maybe I couldn't handle that level of responsibility and authority. But that's why I got this phrase here. It's a phrase I learned from a lady on a podcast recently. This lady is a black American woman, and she's had a lot of success. And this podcast said she's the first black woman to be a CEO in the NBA. Now I can't even remember her name. Forgive me. But I was like, that's an interesting title. But of course, she's breaking the glass ceiling in the sense that she's black, she's a woman in the NBA, you know. And she admits, she says, I didn't know anything about basketball, you know, the National Basketball Association in America. I didn't know anything about basketball. He said, but the guy who hired me, he said, no, but you're a good leader, and that's what we want. But one of the things she said that really spoke to me, and this is just like a week or two ago, and made so much sense to me. She said, when I get a new job like that, my first thought is, I need to create a pipeline for the next generation of leaders. And then she explained what she meant by that. She goes, I am an example, I am the first. He says, as soon as you're the first, he says, if you screw it up, nobody else will come after you. And that's exactly what was happening in that organization. There had been some firsts to be leaders high up, but they did not create a pipeline. They screwed it up. They made the other leaders start to doubt, should we have another African leader in our organization so high up? Should we have another ethnic minority? Is it going to end in sexual scandal or financial scandal? That's what they thought. We even had the challenge, you know, where in Wyoming, where I was a leader. We had a point where the immigration told us, one more person runs away. You know what I mean? Basically, someone will apply to a discipleship training school, fill out the forms, do a great interview online, and the day they arrive at the airport, someone will show up to pick them up, and they've run off, and then start living illegally in the country. And they gave us 3 strikes, the baseball expression. They said if this happens, it happened twice. They said if it happens a 3rd time. And that is exactly an example of how you block the pipeline. Because after that, they were so careful in who they took on. It became so difficult for non-Westerners, non-Europeans, and non-Westerners to come on a DTS or to come on staff in YWAM in Scotland because immigration had threatened us. That's how you're blocking the pipeline, because someone did not have integrity and character to say, okay, if I go there, if I say I'm going to go do a DTS, I'm going to go do a DTS. And sometimes these people had strong CVs. It wasn't just some half-baked dude from the street. It was a guy who'd been in a leadership position, maybe in his local church, in his country, who then does that. So then the pipeline is blocked. So we all, whether you're Danish or international or African, we all have a responsibility that actually many times the places where God places us as the first man, the first woman, the first African, the first Asian, the first whatever, that you have to create a pipeline, because if you don't walk in integrity, it's going to have a problem. I know that right now where I'm being watched, I am probably the first erhvervspsykolog in Holstebro, maybe in all of Denmark, but at least in Holstebro, who's running his own business. If I get tempted to overcharge here or overbill there, or not be reliable, not show up, what would that say? Aha! See, we knew we couldn't trust these Africans to run their own business. I often joke about the fact, it's not a joke, it's a truth. I am so dedicated to paying my taxes. Because they say they do random spot checks, but I promise you, if I am a Danish guy sitting at SCAT looking through names, Bent Nielsen, so Julia, Bogo, so give it to Olu Robbin-Coker, we got to check that one. I'm not quite convinced it's as random as they claim, you know. I have to admit, you know, if it was me, I might even do the same. I think, ooh, let's check that one, you know. So I even hired an accountant, even when I had no money at the start. I hired an accountant because I thought, I don't want them to put a finger or anything. If anyone's going to jail, it's him going to jail, not me, you know. And I want my books to be in order. I'm not going to try and cheat on SCAT or anything like that. Because I know that I'm being watched. I know I'm being watched. And if I fall, it's not just me that fall. It's all of us in this room that fall. Every Christian, every ethnic minority, every man and every woman, all of us, they're watching us. So it's challenged me that, the healthy spirituality is not just about showing up on a Sunday with hands in the air praying great prayers, but then going out on a Monday and cheating on my taxes. It's not about holding grand sermons and speeches. It's the daily walk in integrity at my job. It's showing up on time to work. It's showing, you know what I mean? I think I've made my point. Let me make my last point. My last point is a very broad one. Of course, I don't have time to go into it, but it's a very broad one. Is a healthy spirituality is also a spirituality that's open to learning from others, open to accepting others with different perspectives than us. We're never all going to believe exactly the same. We never are. You know, I wouldn't tell you which group of Christians, but I was growing up to not respect a certain group of Christians. I think they're not even Christians. You know, I'm even embarrassed to say it now, because actually one of my favorite speakers comes from that denomination. You know, and he's got a great positive influence on my life. But we need to have that openness to learn from each other, to other perspectives, instead of being closed. Because many times, let me share, I'll do my best to share this very succinctly. You know, as a psychologist, I learn a lot about the brain and psychological mechanisms. And I'll tell you, there's one thing that terrifies me about the human brain. And it's this concept called cognitive bias. Okay? Cognitive bias is basically that your brain likes to save energy. So it uses some shortcuts to make quick decisions, quick judgments, and it saves energy that way. And it happens at a very subconscious level. And there are many cognitive biases. But cognitive bias means that actually, many times we're not open to change. We're not open to learn from others. We believe what everybody else around us believes. We reject certain truths, you know. And the sad news is that we're all subject to cognitive biases. So there's something you've believed since you were a teenager, and you keep on believing it, and anytime someone tries to present something else with you, to you, you find an explanation for why they're wrong. And this is when we end up being closed, and then we miss out on opportunities to learn. We miss out on opportunities to love and to bless others. I think it was Augustine. I always butcher this when I try and quote it. He said something, St. Augustine said something like, he says, in the essentials, unity. I've already butchered it. But it's this idea of, in the essential things, we have to be united, but in the things that we cannot agree on, let's just show love. Yeah? Does someone know that quote? I'll find it later. Sorry. But in the essentials, let's be united. And there are some basic things we agree on. And let that be enough that we can make space and be open and accepting of each other. And in the things we don't agree on, let's just love one another and include one another and accept one another. I'll tell you, I've had different phases in my life, and I'll give you two concrete examples. The one is one of the greatest mentors I had when I was at university, when I became his youth assistant, his youth pastor, his youth worker. We were so on different wavelengths on some theological issues. He was like this hardcore Calvinist, and I was like, what? How can you be? But he was a loving man, and he mentored me, and he discipled me. So even though we had very strongly different views on some issues, we just loved and accepted each other. Even now in Holstebro, one of my best friends is a pastor of a church. And the list of things we are not agreeing about is so long. But we spent many holidays, periods together with me, my family, his family, sit down, we eat all day and we talk and stuff. And yeah, we avoid the controversial religious, theological issues, but that's fine. Because on the essentials, we're united. And for the things that we don't agree on, we just love and accept each other. He smiles and thinks, little Olu, he'll learn one day. I smile and think, my friend, he too will learn one day. When he reaches my spiritual level, I'm just kidding. That's what my mom says to me. So, because we need to make time for questions and dialogue, I'm going to round up here. I'll just show you the key words again. And see, for me, there are words like wisdom in our daily lives. Not trying to defy the laws of biology. There's words like balance, in that it's not, there's prayer, but there's also counseling, and there's also doctors, there's also medicine to help us. Openness to different perspectives, openness to learn from each other. Openness that helps us beat the cognitive biases that want us to keep us locked in our beliefs and want our world to be unshaken, untouched, undisturbed. Integrity when we walk, because we remember those who come behind us. If we ruin it for them, Like someone was talking to me probably a couple of years ago about, when for example, churches get the opportunity to have a special charitable status or a special status, and it's important we don't misuse that, because again, then the Danish government says, nope, only Folkekirke, everybody else, go do your own thing, Then we've ruined it for those coming behind us. So we need to walk in integrity in these things. The last thing I want to do Now you're going to say, Olu's now going to say all this because he's trying to sell his book. No, I'm trying to give my book away, actually. You can have it for free. Well, it's for free, but it'll cost you one little thing. Here's the little thing it will cost you. It will cost you one act of kindness or generosity to a refugee. Now, some of you do this daily, so it's going to be easy for you. Some of you might have to go out of your way a little bit, but that's the only one thing I ask. Take a book for free. I have like 60 there and even more in the car. Just grab a book, please. This book, in many ways, here's the funny thing. I wrote this about 15 years ago, so if you don't agree with some of the things I say, you're in good company, because I don't agree with everything I said in the book 15 years ago, because I'm growing, I still believe most of it, but use your discernment, But again, the way I wrote the book is to say there are different dimensions to life. One of the things I'm most proud about the book is that the first chapter, I'm focused on God and His good and loving and kind nature. And that has always got to be the foundation. So, if you take that first example I had with the girl who was being mistreated, the first question everybody should be asking themselves was, are we loving this girl? Is what we're doing loving? Stigmatizing her. There were people who were physically attacking this girl. Is this a loving way to treat a child? When we fully grasp the nature and character of God, that it is very foundation is love, it will change the way we treat people. So please grab a copy. My mother-in-law will be extremely happy because I have like a few hundred of these in her cupboard at the house. But I think you'll find some inspiration. In fact, I know you'll find some inspiration in it. And like I said, it costs you nothing in terms of money, but it costs you an act of kindness, of generosity to a refugee.